Welcome to my fourth video on progressive chess. This is Casio, and I'm going to be talking today about the art of disruption. I've already mentioned a lot about how to checkmate your opponent, and if you can't checkmate your opponent, how to win a material. But there are times when you need to do things besides just win material. If we think of each side as capturing the right amount of pieces every turn, then naturally what's going to happen is one side is going to deliver the knockout with a lot of consistency depending on the starting position. In the regular starting position of progressive chess, that would be white, and you can imagine in different Fisher random positions it could be white or black depending on the nature of the position and you know how easy it is to get the pieces out and to eat enemy pieces and so on. This doesn't necessarily mean that the game is a win for white, however. I believe it to be a draw. And one of the reasons is that each side has disrupting weapons at their disposal. There are two major types of disruption. The first is pawn promotion. In other words, even though someone has eaten your material, you have a way to bring new material onto the board. So promoting can unwind the material clock in essence and give you extra pieces to help your piece count. In addition to that, that weapon, there is also the check attack, where you can end your series with check. Now, just ending your series with check is not necessarily powerful in and of itself, but if you do what I call the harassing check, which is to not only end your series with check, but to swarm around the king with a whole bunch of pieces such that the king has to go to an awkward square and has to deal with the usually minor pieces that you've decided to swarm him with, then he doesn't have time to take major pieces like rooks, and often having a rook left on the 8 is enough to eat a lot of material and therefore get back into the right place in the material race to either hold the game or to win the game. So I'll go through each of these. The first example I'm going to give is just from what I consider to be the main line of progressive chess, which is d4, d5, c6. I'll talk more about these moves in the opening section, so for now I'm just going to go through them. Bishop f4, bishop c7, bishop d8, king d8, bishop f5, bishop c2, bishop d1, king takes d1, e4, bishop a6, bishop takes b7, bishop takes a8. And now we can see that black is experiencing certain problems. In order to stay up in the material race, he would have to take at least 2 pieces. You know, right now the piece count is 5 to 4, and he especially needs to take one of the white rooks. Unfortunately, there's no way to take 2 pieces that doesn't get mated. The only legal ways are to promote the a-pawn and eat the rook and the knight, or to promote a pawn on the king side and eat the king side rook and knight. And in either case, that takes all of black's 6 moves, and then he's going to get mated rather easily on the back rank. So from a strict material perspective, it would appear that black is losing. But he has another weapon at his disposal, namely what I call the promoting disruption. So if he, for example, plays f5, f4, f3, f takes g2, g takes h1 queen, although he's only eaten 1 piece, he has added a piece to the board, and therefore he's effectively netted 2 pieces in the comparison of the piece count. And then he needs to spend a move to get his king safe from checkmate. He can't play queen takes g1 check, that would get mated, but king c7 does not appear to get mated, and therefore black has equalized and should be drawing this position to the best of my knowledge. Another example of a pawn promotion turning the tables is from the game Del Frate David from 1988, an Italian progressive championship. Queen g4, queen c8, queen d8, king d8, knight f6, d takes e4, h5. This series is rather easily refuted, but the refutation didn't seem to appear until I found it in 1998. So in the 70s and 80s, this series was still thought to be very popular. But ignoring the material race is always dangerous, even when you throw a bunch of pieces forward like this. So white can play bishop t3, bishop takes e4, bishop takes c6, knight h3, king e2, At first glance, this series looks good because it ends up 6 pieces to 4. However, black has just a crushing reply with the pawn promotion. G5, G4, G takes H3, H takes G2, G takes H1. And at this point, he has merely equalized the piece count, but it is, well, actually, he would be up by 1 piece here, which would probably only normally be enough to draw, being up by 1 piece. In this particular case, though, he has 2 rooks and a queen, which, what pieces they are does actually matter here. But it's the final move that's really the nail in White's coffin, and that is queen takes c6. White was probably figuring that black had to move his king off the back rank, and that this type of series would get checkmated. But it appears that the queen guards against all potential checkmates, and therefore black is just destroying White here. He's up. Not only is he now up 5 to 3 in the piece count, but he has a queen and 2 rooks, and is just completely winning here. So those 2 examples should give you some idea of kind of coming from behind and promoting to win. There are plenty of examples of white or black promoting on the 7 or the 8, but those are almost always material grabs. The promotion isn't so much done for disruption as to simply get a lot of material. In those cases are rather obvious. It's really the 5 and the 6 where the promotion really has this major disrupting effect. One other thing worth mentioning is what I call the dangling pawn disruption, or the near promotion of a pawn, which can be just as effective as actually promoting the pawn. And this is a game Sestchikov Salvadori from 1992. D4, C5, C takes D4, knight A3, E4, E5. Again, E4, E5 is the right idea, but knight A3 is not. This series almost certainly wins for black. E6, Queen G5, Queen C1, Queen D1, catching up and gaining material. But white plays a series that deserves careful consideration in how to refute. Rook D1, D4, D7, F7, F8. He ends the series with check. And although the piece count's only 5 to 5, he's hoping that black's king is on a bad square on F8 and can't defend itself there from checkmate, or will have to move again. And that his knight on A3 maybe will do something on the 7. But it turns out that black has a very powerful series. He doesn't really have to even worry about the material race because of this series, notably the fact that white did not eat a rook on his 5. So king takes F8, knight H6. This does defend from mate on the king side, as well as stopping pawn promotions on that side of the board. And then he just plays B5, B4, BA, A takes B2. This exhausts his 6 moves, but the pawn on B2 is almost as powerful as a queen would be in terms of what white has to deal with on the 7. For one thing, he did also take 2 pieces here, so he didn't ignore the material race, so this is not pure disruption. But it might be that white might have some way to come back if it weren't for the pawn on B2. He might have some solution here. But as it turns out, with the pawn on B2, rook on A, and rook on H8 are all major threats. The pawn on B2 is practically a queen and has to be taken. And so this series winds up being incredibly disruptive. And in fact, in the game, he played H4, rook H3, rook B3, rook takes B2, rook takes B8, rook takes A8, rook takes A7. And even though he captured something on 5 out of the 7 moves of the series, well, okay, only 4 of the 7, but still, even though white did a lot of capturing, he's just sitting on a back rank mate, and black just checkmated with this simple series here. And rook D1 mate, a pattern you should be familiar with from seeing our videos on checkmating the opponent. So those examples should give you some idea of the power of promoting a pawn. Now let's look at the second type of disruption, which is namely swarming the opponent with pieces and delivering check. First I'll look at delivering harassing checks, and then I will look at simply swarming a whole bunch of pieces, trying to create threats with a whole bunch of pieces without actually capturing anything, which I call a swarm. And it's worth pointing out that most of these attempts, while they look good superficially, when you ignore the material race, you generally they don't work. So really what you would like to do is find a series that combines elements of eating material with delivering a harassing check. In that case, it can be extremely powerful. So it's definitely worth mentioning that up front, that many attempts to swarm the opponent, while they look good and you may think, oh, I'm doing great, it turns out there's some cold computer-like refutation where one side can take the material and dodge checkmate. So first, let's look at the example Linnemann Kowalczyk from 1998. We looked at this in the example on ghosting. Queen f3, queen takes f6, queen takes d8, but it's worth looking at again. King takes d8, b5, b4, c5. And you'll notice here that the piece count is, white is already up 6-5. So he doesn't actually have to eat anything. If you were making a series that were purely material in nature, he would like to eat one or two pieces, of course. But it turns out black's king is not in a good way. So after this series that we already saw, d4, bishop d2, bishop takes b4, king d2, bishop a5 check, black really doesn't have a good response. Either he plays king e7, which, as we saw in the Kowalczyk game, gets ghosted rather easily to a discover ghost, or he plays something like king e8. And if we look at this position, even though black has things he could do, for example, promote a pawn on b1, or perhaps play cd and bishop a3, bishop b2, bishop a1, or knight c6, knight e5, none of these are going to get him out of this checkmate. He's checkmated very trivially on the back rank to a pattern like, knight on c6 and knight c7. Or knight e5 and knight c6 and something takes f7, patterns with like bishop takes f7. There's just all sorts of mating patterns here. And if this bishop on a5 stays on, it's completely trivial to mate because it's already can cover these dark squares and only two moves, something like bishop d8, bishop f6, and anything to the back rank or knight c7 would checkmate there. So black has to spend a lot of moves here just to avoid checkmate, and he's already behind in the material race, and white is just gonna crush him. And as we saw in the game, he got quickly ghosted. This next example we're going to look at is from 1996. It's another game of Fred Galvin against Timo Hankala, and Galvin won this game with a harassing check, e4, e6, knight f6, again this series. And Galvin did not tend to play in this tournament the best series on his 3 or 4, and tended, even though he didn't play theoretically the best series, to just outplay his opponents in unusual positions. So he played this series knight h3, d4, bishop d2, and black should probably just play something here, something else, but instead he played knight takes e4, knight c3, knight takes d1, king e7. This is not a good position for the king. He can't get ghosted. It takes too long to actually get the white king to the diagonal and then deliver check. But he can get subject to a very harassing check, namely knight g5 takes f7 takes d8, bishop b5. This is defending against mate while also threatening to harass the king on future series. So this is the so-called swarming effect I talked about. And bishop g5 check. So essentially all his minor pieces have swarmed, and it makes it very hard for black to actually take any of the major pieces, which are then going to come out on the 7. This pattern of the bishop checking through a knight deserves special mention, and it happens a lot, and it leads to very disruptive series. The king here has this covers the light squares. Even if there weren't a pawn on e6, he still couldn't go to e6, so he has to go to either e8 or to d6, and the king's just in a terrible box. Obviously on d6 he's just going to get ghosted, discovered ghosted because of the bishop on f8. So in the game he played king e8, h6, a takes g5, knight c3, knight takes b5. Again, notice he dealt with the piece around his king, but he still wound up getting checkmated when he played bishop b4 check, and then white mated with the pretty serious knight c3, castles long, d5, d6, h4, h takes g5, and rook takes h8. So that's a good example of a harassing check. And this next game is Tilken, a game I played against Daniel Tilken in 1998. I was black. d4, d5, knight c6, bishop g5, bishop takes e7, bishop takes d8. This is always a question of whether or not you want to play through c7 or through e7. The disadvantage of e7 is that it opens up this line for this bishop, so black doesn't have to waste a move playing e5 in order to play something like bishop a3, bishop takes b2. And in fact, black played king takes d8, bishop f5, bishop takes c2, bishop takes d1, and white played ignored the bishop on d1 and played e4, bishop a6, bishop takes b7, bishop takes a8, bishop takes c6. And this should be a normally would be a potentially winning advantage.